I refused to pay for my daughter-in-law's $50,000 cruise. She slapped me and shouted, "Then find somewhere else to live." My son nodded. "I'll squeeze every cent out of you." I walked out with no destination. 2 days later, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I refuse to pay $50,000 for your cruise, Lilia. The words left my mouth quietly, but they might as well have been a bomb exploding in my son David's living room. I watched as my daughter-in-law's face twisted into something ugly, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the cruise brochure so tightly it crumpled. "Excuse me?" Lilia's voice was ice cold, that tone she used when she wanted to make someone feel small. I'd heard it countless times over the past 5 years since she married my son. I straightened my shoulders, trying to find strength I wasn't sure I still possessed. "You heard me. I won't pay for your anniversary cruise." The silence that followed was deafening. David sat frozen on the couch between us, his eyes darting back and forth like he was watching a tennis match. But I knew which side he'd choose. He always chose Lilia. "Marlene," Lilia said, standing up slowly, her 5'9" frame towering over me as I remained seated. "I think you misunderstood. This isn't a request." My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I understood perfectly, and the answer is no." That's when it happened. The sound of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed through the room like a gunshot. The sting was immediate, radiating across my face and down my neck. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat spreading under my skin. "Then find somewhere else to live," Lilia screamed, her composed mask finally slipping. "I'm tired of supporting a selfish old woman who can't even help her own family." I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd crossed a line. Instead, he nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "maybe it's time you found your own place. Lilia's right. We've been carrying you financially for too long." The betrayal hit harder than the slap. David was my only child, the baby I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was 3. I'd worked double shifts at the diner, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. And this was how he repaid me. "I've been paying rent here for 2 years, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've helped with groceries, utilities, even that down payment on your car." Lilia laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Helped? You mean the measly $800 a month you contribute? David makes 6 figures, Marlene. Your little contribution is nothing." "Then why do you need my $50,000 for a cruise?" I asked. David finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Resentment. "Because we deserve it, Mom. Lilia and I work hard. We've earned a luxury vacation. With my money." "Money you're just hoarding anyway," Lilia snapped. "What are you saving it for? You're 62 years old with no life, no friends, nothing. At least let your family enjoy it." The words cut deep because part of them was true. I had become isolated over the years, especially after moving in with them. Lilia had slowly but systematically distanced me from my few friends, always finding reasons why I couldn't attend gatherings or why people couldn't visit. "I'm saving it for emergencies," I said weakly. "Well, this is an emergency," David said, standing up and crossing his arms. "Our marriage needs this trip, Mom. And if you can't support that, then maybe you need to reevaluate what family means to you." I stared at my son, this man I barely recognized. When had he become so cold? When had he started speaking to me like I was a burden instead of his mother? "I see," I whispered, gathering my purse and standing on shaky legs. "I'll pack my things." "Good," Lilia said, settling back onto the couch with a satisfied smirk. "And don't think you can guilt trip us into changing our minds. David agrees with me completely." As I walked toward the stairs to pack my belongings, I heard David's voice behind me. "Mom, wait." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he was finally going to stand up for me. "I'm going to need every penny from you. That $50,000 plus whatever else you've got saved. Consider it compensation for everything Lilia and I have provided over the years." The hope died instantly, replaced by a cold numbness that spread through my entire body. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just continued up the stairs to the small room that had been my home for 2 years. It didn't take long to pack. When you've been made to feel like a guest in your own family, you don't accumulate much. 2 suitcases, and a box of photo albums. That was the sum total of my life. As I carried my bags downstairs, I could hear Lilia on the phone in the kitchen, her voice animated and happy. "Yes, Mom. She finally agreed to move out. I know. I'm so relieved. David and I can finally have our house back." I paused at the bottom of the stairs, listening to her paint me as the villain in her story. According to Lilia, I had graciously decided to give them their space and had even offered to help pay for their anniversary cruise as a parting gift. David was nowhere to be seen when I reached the front door, probably hiding in his office, too much of a coward to face what he'd done. I set my bags down and took one last look around the house where I'd thought I'd found a place to belong. The irony wasn't lost on me. This house, with its granite countertops and hardwood floors, had been purchased with my help. When David and Lilia got married, I'd given them $20,000 from my savings as a wedding gift, money I'd earned scrubbing floors and serving coffee for 30 years. I picked up my bags and walked out into the cool evening air. My car, a 15-year-old Honda that had seen better days, sat in the driveway like a faithful old friend. At least it was mine, paid for with my own money. As I loaded my belongings into the trunk, I realized I had nowhere to go, no family who would take me in, no close friends to call. The few people I'd once been close to had drifted away over the years, or been pushed away by Lilia's subtle manipulations. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. At 62, I was homeless, essentially alone in the world, with nothing but my car and whatever money I had left in my savings account. The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down my face as the reality of my situation hit me. My own son had chosen his wife's greed over his mother's well-being. The child I'd sacrificed everything for had thrown me away like garbage. I started the car and drove aimlessly through the suburbs, past houses filled with families who probably loved each other, past restaurants where I'd once worked, past a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. As night fell, I found myself in a 24-hour diner parking lot, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My left cheek was still red from Lilia's slap, and my eyes were swollen from crying. I looked exactly like what I was, a discarded old woman with nowhere to go. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was stirring. It felt foreign at first, this tiny spark of something that might have been anger. Or maybe it was just the beginning of understanding that I deserved better than this. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank balance. $87,000. Not a fortune, but more than Lilia thought I had. Money I'd saved penny by penny, working jobs that destroyed my back and aged my hands, always thinking I was building something for my family's future. Now I realized the truth. I hadn't been building anything for them. I'd been building a prison for myself, one made of guilt and obligation, and the desperate need to be loved by people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I spent 3 days living in my car, moving from parking lot to parking lot, trying to figure out what to do next. The nights were the worst, curled up in the back seat, listening to every sound, jumping at every shadow. During the day, I'd drive around aimlessly, sometimes stopping at diners for coffee and a cheap meal, trying to make my money last. On the 4th morning, I found myself at the harbor. I wasn't sure what had drawn me there. Maybe the sound of seagulls crying overhead, or the way the morning light danced on the water. It reminded me of better times, when I was young, and the world still seemed full of possibilities. I parked near the marina and walked along the wooden planks, breathing in the salt air. Massive cruise ships towered above smaller boats, their white hulls gleaming in the sunlight. I'd never been on a cruise, could never afford such luxury, but I'd always imagined what it would be like to just sail away from all your problems. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the deck of one of the largest ships, wearing a crisp white captain's uniform, his silver hair catching the morning breeze. Even after 40 years, I'd have recognized that profile anywhere. The strong jaw, the way he held his shoulders, the careful way he moved. James Morrison. My heart stopped beating for a moment, then started again so hard I could feel it in my throat. James Morrison, my first love, The man I'd thought I'd marry before life got complicated and pulled us in different directions. I hadn't seen him since 1983, when we were both 22 and thought we had all the time in the world. I stood frozen on the dock, debating whether to run before he noticed me. I probably looked terrible. I'd been living in my car for 3 days after all. My hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I was wearing the same jeans and sweater I'd put on when I left David's house. But before I could decide, he looked up and our eyes met across the water. The recognition was instant. His face broke into a smile, that same smile that had made my teenage heart race, and he raised his hand in a wave. Then he was moving, walking quickly along the ship's deck toward the gangway. Marlene? Marlene Patterson? Hearing my maiden name after so many years brought tears to my eyes. It's Marlene Cooper now, I called back, though even as I said it, I wondered if that was still true. Was I still a Cooper if my son had disowned me? James was jogging down the gangway now, and I could see the years had been kind to him. He was still tall and lean, though his hair had gone completely silver, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into ocean sunlight. "My God," he said when he reached me, stopping just a few feet away. "Marlene, after all these years." "Hello, James." I felt suddenly shy, like I was 22 again, and seeing him for the first time at that summer job we'd both worked at the marine supply company. "You look," he paused, his eyes taking in my appearance with concern rather than judgment. "You look like you could use a cup of coffee and a good meal." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That obvious? I've spent 40 years at sea, sweetheart. I can read the weather in a person's face just like I can read storm clouds on the horizon." He gestured toward his ship. "Come aboard. Let's catch up properly." I hesitated. "I don't want to impose. You're probably busy and I'm not exactly dressed for a tour of a cruise ship." "Marlene," he said gently, "I'm the captain. I can invite whoever I want aboard my ship. And right now, I want to invite an old friend who looks like she could use someone to talk to." The kindness in his voice nearly broke me. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with genuine warmth, without wanting something in return. I followed him up the gangway, marveling at the size of the ship. "You're really a captain," I said. "You always said you would be, but I never imagined." "The Sea Star," he said proudly. 1,500 passengers, crew of 600. She's been my home for the past 10 years. He led me through corridors that looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork on the walls. We passed elegant dining rooms and lounges, a theater, even what looked like a small shopping mall. "This is incredible," I breathed. "Wait until you see my quarters," he said with a grin. "Captain's privilege, best view on the ship." His cabin was indeed magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the harbor. The space was larger than most apartments, with a sitting area, a dining table, and what I assumed was a bedroom through an open doorway. "Coffee?" he asked, moving to what appeared to be a fully equipped kitchenette. "Please." I settled into one of the comfortable chairs, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. 4 days ago, I'd been living with my son, feeling trapped and unappreciated. Now I was sitting in a ship captain's quarters, reuniting with the love of my youth. James handed me a steaming mug and sat across from me. "So," he said, his blue eyes studying my face, "what's brought you to my harbor looking like you've been through a storm?" I took a sip of coffee. It was excellent, of course, and tried to figure out where to begin. "It's a long story. I've got time. We don't sail until tomorrow evening." So I told him everything. About Richard leaving when David was small, about working multiple jobs to support us, about David's marriage to Lilia, about moving in with them and slowly losing myself in their house. I told him about the cruise demand, the slap, David's betrayal, the 3 nights in my car. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. When I finished, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Your son and his wife demanded $50,000 from you, and when you refused, they threw you out of the house? It sounds worse when you say it like that." "It sounds exactly as bad as it is, Marlene. That's elder abuse." The words hit me like a physical blow. "It's not," I mean, they financially exploited you and then made you homeless when you stopped complying. That's textbook elder abuse. James stood up and began pacing. How much money have you given them over the years? I thought about it. The $20,000 for their wedding. Help with the house down payment. That was another $15,000. Monthly rent, utilities, groceries, probably $60,000 over the past 2 years. Nearly $100,000, James said quietly. Jesus, Marlene. I wanted to help. David is my son. And you're his mother. That works both ways. James stopped pacing and looked at me. What are you going to do now? I don't know. Find a cheap apartment somewhere, I guess. Maybe get a job, though, at my age. I shrugged helplessly. James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the harbor. Then he turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What if I told you there was another option? What do you mean? He sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Marlene, I'm not just the captain of this ship. I'm part owner of the cruise line, Morrison Maritime. Maybe you've heard of it? I shook my head. I knew nothing about cruise lines. We started small 20 years ago, just a few ships doing Caribbean runs. Now we have a fleet of 12 ships, routes all over the world, and we're always looking for experienced people to join our management team. James, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't know anything about cruise ships or maritime business. But you know about customer service. You know about working with difficult people, managing tight budgets, solving problems on the fly. You've been doing it your whole life. He paused. And you know about sacrifice, about putting others first. Those are exactly the qualities we need in our senior management. I stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. His eyes were serious now, intent. Morrison Maritime is expanding. We need someone to oversee guest services across our entire fleet. Someone who understands what it means to make people feel welcome, valued, appreciated. Someone who knows what it's like when the people who should care about you don't. The offer was so unexpected, so generous that I couldn't process it at first. James, I can't. I mean, what do I know about running a business? More than you think, and you'd have the best teacher in the business. He smiled. Me. I felt something stirring in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Why? I asked. Why would you do this for me? James was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Do you remember the last time we saw each other? The night before you left for Chicago? I remembered. I'd gotten the scholarship to business school, a chance to make something of myself. James had been offered his first position as a junior officer on a cargo ship. We'd both known we were being pulled in different directions, but we'd been too young to fight for what we had. I should have asked you to marry me that night, he said softly. I should have found a way to make it work. Instead, I let you go, and it's been one of my biggest regrets. My breath caught. James, I'm not saying this to pressure you or because I expect anything romantic to happen. I'm saying it because I never stopped caring about you, Marlene. And if I can give you a chance to start over, to build something meaningful after what they did to you, then maybe I can make up for some of that lost time. I set down my coffee cup with trembling hands. Outside the windows, the harbor bustled with activity. People going about their lives, pursuing their dreams, building their futures. For so long, I'd felt like I was just existing, serving everyone else's dreams while my own withered away. I don't know anything about business partnerships, I said slowly. Then it's a good thing you'll have an excellent teacher. James smiled. What do you say, Marlene? Ready to sail away from all this and start a new adventure? I looked around his elegant cabin, thought about my car in the parking lot with everything I owned crammed into 2 suitcases. Then I thought about David and Lilia, probably already booking their cruise, spending money they'd expected to extort from me. Maybe it was time to stop being the victim in my own story. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. Yes, I think I am. The next 6 weeks passed like a whirlwind. James wasn't kidding when he said I'd have the best teacher in the business. Every morning I'd arrive at the Morrison Maritime offices, a gleaming building overlooking the harbor, and dive into learning everything about the cruise industry. It was overwhelming at first. Guest services protocols, safety regulations, staff management, vendor relationships, food and beverage operations. My head spun with information. But gradually, pieces started falling into place. The customer service skills I'd developed over 30 years of waitressing translated perfectly to hospitality management. The budget management I'd learned from years of stretching every dollar suddenly became fleet-wide cost optimization. "You're a natural at this," James said one afternoon as we reviewed guest satisfaction surveys from the previous quarter. We were in his office, papers spread across a conference table that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. "I'm just applying common sense," I replied, though I felt a flush of pride at his words. "People want to feel valued. They want their problems solved quickly and their good times enhanced. It's not rocket science." "You'd be surprised how many people in this industry forget that," James said with a smile. "They get caught up in profit margins and efficiency metrics and forget that we're in the business of making memories." I'd been staying in a company apartment near the offices, a beautiful one-bedroom with a view of the water. It was temporary, James assured me, just until I decided where I wanted to live permanently. The freedom to make that choice still felt surreal. 3 weeks into my training, James made the partnership official. I signed papers that made me a 25% owner of Morrison Maritime, with full authority over guest services operations. My investment was the $50,000 I'd refused to give Lilia, money that was now working for me instead of funding someone else's luxury. "Are you sure about this?" I'd asked James as we sat in the lawyer's office. "This is a huge risk for you. The biggest risk I ever took was letting you walk away 40 years ago," he'd replied. "I'm not making that mistake twice." The romantic tension between us was impossible to ignore, but we were both taking things slowly. We'd have dinner together most evenings, sometimes in nice restaurants, sometimes just takeout in his apartment. We'd talk for hours, about the past, about the business, about everything except what was growing between us. I was different now. I could feel it in the way I carried myself, in the confidence that crept into my voice during business meetings. For the first time in decades, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I wasn't grateful for scraps of attention. I was contributing something valuable, and people respected me for it. The transformation wasn't just internal. James had insisted I update my wardrobe for my new role, and shopping for business attire had been a revelation. I'd spent so many years buying whatever was cheapest, whatever would last longest, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to choose clothes that actually flattered me. Now I had tailored blazers, elegant dresses, shoes that made me feel powerful instead of practical. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a businesswoman, not a discarded mother living on charity. My phone had been eerily quiet since I'd left David's house. No calls, no texts, no attempts to check on my welfare. The silence spoke volumes about how they really felt about me. I was out of sight and out of mind, exactly as they'd wanted, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing staffing schedules for our Caribbean fleet. David's name appeared on my phone, and I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hello, David." "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. "Where the hell are you? I've been trying to find you for weeks." "I'm exactly where you told me to be," I said calmly, living my own life. "Look, about that night. Lilia feels bad about how things went down. We both do. Why don't you come home and we can talk about this like adults?" I almost laughed. "Come home?" "David, you made it very clear that I don't have a home with you." "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You know we didn't mean it like that. We were just stressed about money and you decided your stress was my responsibility to fix." I kept my voice level, professional. "What do you need, David?" There was a pause. Look, we're having some cash flow problems. The investment Lilia made didn't pan out like we expected, and what investment?" Another pause. "She took some money from our savings to invest in her friend's startup. It was supposed to be a sure thing, but the company went under last month." I closed my eyes. "How much money?" "Most of it," he admitted quietly. "About 40,000. And now we can't make the mortgage payment and the cruise line wants payment for the booking. So that's why they'd called. Not because they missed me. Not because they regretted how they'd treated me. They needed money again." "I see," I said. "And you thought I'd just hand over another $40,000? Mom, please, we're family. I know we screwed up, but we're desperate here. The bank is talking about foreclosure, and if we can't pay for this cruise, Lilia's going to leave me. She says she can't be married to a financial failure. The old Marlene would have felt guilty. The old Marlene would have rushed to fix their problems, would have sacrificed her own security to bail them out once again. But I wasn't the old Marlene anymore. David, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said. I am not going to give you any money. Not for your mortgage, not for your cruise, not for anything. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and Lilia spent your savings on a risky investment without consulting anyone. You made poor financial decisions, and now you want me to face the consequences. But you have the money. I know you do. How I spend my money is no longer your concern. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. You made that very clear when you threw me out of your house. We didn't throw you out. We just asked you to contribute more to the household. You demanded $50,000 and then assaulted me when I refused. Let's not rewrite history, David. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke again, and his voice was different now, harder. Fine. But don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. Because after this, you're on your own. The threat might have worked on the old Marlene, but the new me just smiled. I'm already on my own, David. And I'm doing just fine. I hung up before he could respond. That evening, James and I were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the harbor. I told him about David's call, and he'd listened with a grim expression. How are you feeling about it? He asked as we shared a bottle of wine. Relieved, actually, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. For years, I kept waiting for him to appreciate what I was doing for him. I kept thinking that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, he'd finally see me as more than just a source of money. And now I know that was never going to happen. He doesn't see me as his mother. He sees me as his backup plan. And I'm done being anyone's backup plan. James reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you. The simple words meant more to me than any grand gesture. When was the last time someone had been proud of me? When was the last time someone had seen my strength instead of just my usefulness? There's something else, James said, his thumb tracing patterns on my knuckles. I got a call today from our booking department. Someone made a reservation on the Sea Star for next month's Caribbean cruise. A Mr. and Mrs. David Cooper. My heart stopped. They booked the cruise, even without my money. Apparently they found the money somewhere. Credit cards, probably. James's expression was carefully neutral. The cruise they couldn't afford without your $50,000. I stared at him, processing this information. They're going to be on your ship. On our ship. It appears so. James squeezed my hand. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about it for a long moment. David and Lilia would board that ship expecting a luxury vacation, probably paid for with borrowed money they had no realistic way to repay. They'd strut around the decks, take selfies by the pool, complain about the service if their towels weren't fluffy enough, and they'd have no idea that the woman they'd discarded, the mother they'd used and thrown away, was now part owner of the very company providing their vacation. I want to be there, I said finally, not to cause trouble, not to confront them. I just want to see who I really was to them, now that I know who I really am to myself. James nodded slowly. The Sea Star is launching a new guest services program next month. It would be the perfect opportunity for the new VP of Guest Services to be on board, observing operations firsthand. VP of Guest Services? I raised an eyebrow. Effective immediately, James said with a smile. That is, if you're interested in the position. I looked around the restaurant, at the other diners enjoying their evening, at the harbor lights twinkling through the windows. 6 weeks ago, I'd been sleeping in my car, discarded and alone. Now I was a business owner, a vice president, a woman with choices and power and a future. I'm very interested, I said. James lifted his wine glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. But as we drank, I was already thinking about the cruise. About David and Lilia stepping onto our ship, still believing I was the weak, desperate woman they'd pushed around. They had no idea what they were walking into, and I intended to keep it that way, at least for a while. The anticipation was already building, a mixture of nervousness and excitement that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the victim of someone else's story. I was going to be the author of my own. The morning of embarkation, I stood on the bridge of the Sea Star watching passengers stream up the gangways. The organized chaos of cruise ship boarding was something I'd learned to appreciate over the past month. 1,500 people, all excited for their vacation, all expecting everything to go perfectly. I'd been living aboard the ship for 2 weeks now, learning every detail of operations from the inside. My cabin was on the same deck as James's, connected by a private corridor that we hadn't discussed, but both appreciated. Our relationship had deepened naturally during these weeks at sea, like we were picking up a conversation that had been interrupted 40 years ago. "There," James said, pointing to a couple making their way up gangway B. "Your son and daughter-in-law." My stomach clenched as I spotted David and Lilia. Even from this distance, I could see Lilia's designer luggage, her carefully styled hair, the way she gestured imperiously at the porters handling their bags. David walked behind her, looking older than his 37 years, shoulders slumped with what I now recognized as the posture of a man constantly trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. "They look exactly like I expected," James murmured. I'd shown him photos from my phone, the few family pictures I still had. He'd studied them with the intensity of a military strategist, which wasn't far from the truth. We'd planned this day carefully. "Remember," he said, turning to me, "you're Marlene Morrison now, VP of Guest Services. As far as anyone knows, you're conducting routine observations of embarkation procedures." Marlene Morrison. I'd started using the name a week ago after James proposed it. "For business purposes," he'd said, though we both knew it meant more than that. The name felt like armor, protecting the new woman I'd become from the old wounds the old Marlene carried. I made my way down to the main deck, wearing my crisp navy blazer with the Morrison Maritime logo, my staff badge clearly visible. I positioned myself near the guest services desk, ostensibly reviewing check-in procedures, but really waiting for the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. It took an hour before I saw them. Lilia came first, of course, striding through the atrium like she owned the place. She wore a white sundress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, and her new diamond bracelet caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. David followed, looking around with the wide-eyed expression of someone who'd never been on a cruise ship before. Despite everything, I felt a pang of maternal affection. He'd always had that same expression as a child when we'd go somewhere special, the zoo, the county fair, anywhere his father had never taken him. They approached the guest services desk with a complaint already forming on Lilia's lips. "Excuse me," she said to Maria, our head guest services representative, "but there seems to be some mistake with our cabin assignment. We booked a balcony suite, but we're being placed in some tiny interior room." Maria checked her computer with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with entitled passengers all day. "I show you in cabin 4127, which is indeed an interior cabin. That matches your booking confirmation." "That's impossible," Lilia snapped. "I specifically requested a balcony suite. I understand your frustration, ma'am. Let me see what upgrades might be available." Maria's fingers flew over her keyboard. "I do have some balcony cabins available, but there would be an upgrade fee of $800 per night. For a 7-night cruise, that would be $5,600, David interrupted, his voice tight. "We can't afford that." Lilia whipped around to glare at him. "Don't embarrass me, David. We'll take the upgrade." "Lilia, we've already maxed out the credit cards just to pay for this trip. We can't." "Then figure it out," she hissed, low enough that she thought only he could hear, but I was standing close enough to catch every word. "I am not spending my anniversary cruise in some closet without a window." This was my chance. I stepped forward, my professional smile in place. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. "Is there a problem I can help with?" Maria looked relieved to see me. "Ms. Morrison, these guests are hoping to upgrade their cabin." Lilia turned to me, and for a moment I thought she might recognize me, but her eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition. To her, I was just another service employee. "Finally, someone who might actually be helpful," Lilia said with exaggerated relief. "This young woman seems to think we can't afford a simple cabin upgrade." I looked at her steadily. This woman who had slapped me, thrown me out of my home, tried to steal my life savings. She was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to solve her problem, just like she'd always expected me to solve her problems. I'm Marlene Morrison, Vice President of Guest Services, I said, extending my hand. And you are? Lilia Cooper, she said, shaking my hand with the limp grip of someone who considered handshakes beneath her. And this is my husband, David. We're celebrating our anniversary, and we really need a cabin with a balcony. Of course, I said smoothly. Let me see what I can do for you. I moved behind the desk and pretended to review their booking on the computer. David stood slightly behind Lilia, and when our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something that might have been recognition, but it passed so quickly I couldn't be sure. I see the challenge, I said after a moment. Your original booking was made quite recently, so most of our premium cabins are already occupied. Recently? Lilia's voice rose. We booked this months ago. I tilted my head, looking at the screen. According to our records, this reservation was made 6 weeks ago and paid for with a credit card that was declined twice before the payment went through. David's face flushed red. There was a processing error with our bank. Of course, I said pleasantly. These things happen. I could feel the power dynamic in this conversation, and it was intoxicating. For the first time in my relationship with these people, I held all the cards. They needed something from me, and I could choose whether or not to give it to them. I do have one option, I said finally. There's a balcony suite that just became available due to a last-minute cancellation. The upgrade fee would be waived as an anniversary gift from Morrison Maritime. Lilia's eyes lit up. Really? That's wonderful. There is one small condition, I continued. The suite comes with dedicated concierge service, which means you'll be working directly with me throughout your cruise to ensure everything meets our highest standards. That sounds perfect, Lilia gushed. We appreciate excellent service. I smiled. Excellent. Maria will get you sorted with your new cabin keys. The suite is on deck 12, and I believe you'll find it more than adequate for your anniversary celebration. As Maria processed the cabin change, Lilia leaned closer to me. Between you and me, she said in a conspiratorial whisper, it's so refreshing to deal with competent management instead of these entry-level employees who don't understand customer service. I completely understand, I replied. Good service is all about recognizing what people truly deserve. 20 minutes later, I watched them walk toward the elevators, Lilia practically floating with satisfaction at having gotten her way. David looked back once, and again I caught that flicker of something in his expression, but he said nothing, just followed his wife like he'd been doing for years. I made my way back to the bridge, where James was waiting with a knowing smile. How did it go? He asked. They have no idea who I am, I said, though I felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, but also a deep sadness that my own son hadn't recognized his mother. Are you okay? I thought about it. I think so. It's strange, seeing them like this. They're exactly who I always knew they were, but somehow it feels different when you're not depending on them for anything. James nodded. Power changes perspective. They're in the Sunrise Suite now, I said. The one with the cameras. We'd chosen that suite specifically. As part of our guest services training program, several cabins were equipped with discrete cameras to monitor housekeeping standards and guest satisfaction. Everything was completely legal and disclosed in the fine print of the cruise agreement, though most guests never bothered to read it. And they have dedicated concierge service, I added, with you as their concierge. With me as their concierge. I looked out at the harbor, where the last few passengers were boarding. They're going to get exactly the level of service they deserve. The ship's horn sounded, signaling our departure. I watched the dock crew prepare to cast off the lines that kept us tethered to shore. Soon we'd be at sea, a floating city with 1,500 passengers and 600 crew members, all under James's command. And somewhere below us, in their upgraded suite, David and Lilia were probably already ordering room service and planning their evening entertainment, blissfully unaware that the woman they'd discarded was now in control of every aspect of their vacation experience. The old Marlene would have felt guilty about the deception. The old Marlene would have revealed herself immediately, would have tried to reconcile, would have bent over backwards to make them happy. But I wasn't the old Marlene anymore. I was Marlene Morrison, VP of Guest Services, part owner of this ship and this company, partner to a man who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Tomorrow night was the Welcome Aboard show, where James traditionally introduced key staff members to the passengers. It was a chance for everyone to meet the people who would be taking care of them during their cruise. I was very much looking forward to that introduction. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, moving to stand beside me at the bridge windows. "I'm thinking about tomorrow night," I said, "about the moment when they realize who I really am. And how does that make you feel?" I considered the question seriously. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in my life, completely free." The Sea Star pulled away from the dock, carrying us all toward whatever waited in the open ocean. But I was no longer afraid of uncertainty. I'd learned that sometimes the unknown was exactly where you needed to be. Behind us, the harbor grew smaller and smaller until it was just a memory on the horizon. Ahead of us lay 7 days at sea, 7 days where David and Lilia would slowly discover that their actions had consequences they'd never imagined. I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply planning to let them experience the same reality I'd been living in for years. A world where you had to earn respect rather than demand it. Where your worth was measured by your character rather than your connections. It was going to be an interesting cruise. The first 3 days of the cruise passed like a carefully choreographed dance. As their dedicated concierge, I shadowed David and Lilia's every move while maintaining my professional distance. They treated me exactly as I'd expected, as hired help who existed solely to fulfill their demands. "Marlene," Lilia would say, snapping her fingers when she wanted my attention. "The towels in our bathroom aren't fluffy enough. Fix it." "Of course, Mrs. Cooper," I'd reply with perfect politeness. "I'll have housekeeping address that immediately." David barely acknowledged my presence, which shouldn't have surprised me but still stung. This was the child I'd raised alone, the boy I'd worked 3 jobs to support, and he looked through me like I was invisible. Through the discreet monitoring system, James and I observed their private moments. The fights were constant and brutal. Lilia berated David for everything. His clothes, his conversation, his inability to provide the lifestyle she felt she deserved. "I can't believe I married such a loser," she said on the second night, her voice sharp with contempt as they dressed for dinner. "Your mother was right about one thing. You're a disappointment." David flinched at the words. "Lilia, please. We're supposed to be celebrating our anniversary. Celebrating what? 5 years of mediocrity? 5 years of pretending you're something you're not?" She turned away from the mirror where she'd been applying lipstick. "At least when your mother was bankrolling us, we could maintain some dignity." "She'll come around," David said weakly. "She always does." "No, she won't. She's gotten selfish in her old age. Typical." Lilia picked up her purse. "Well, at least this cruise is paid for. After this, we're going to have to make some serious changes." I watched this exchange from the security office, James beside me. He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Still think you made the wrong choice?" he asked. I shook my head. The woman on that screen wasn't someone I'd ever truly known. I'd seen glimpses of her cruelty, but I'd always made excuses, always blamed stress or circumstances. Now I was seeing her true nature, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. The third day brought the incident that would change everything. I was in the dining room, observing lunch service, when I heard raised voices from across the room. Lilia was standing at her table, gesticulating angrily at one of our waitstaff, a young woman named Carmen who was working her first cruise contract. "This is completely unacceptable." Lilia's voice carried across the dining room, causing other passengers to turn and stare. "I ordered my salad with dressing on the side, and you brought it pre-dressed. Do you not understand English?" Carmen, whose English was actually excellent, but carried a slight accent from her native Philippines, apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I can get you a new salad right away." "No, that's not good enough," Lilia snapped. "I want to speak to your manager. This kind of incompetence is exactly why people like you shouldn't be working in hospitality. People like you." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard that tone before, directed at me countless times, but hearing it aimed at Carmen, a hard-working young woman sending money home to support her family, filled me with rage. David sat silently at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone, including his wife. He was embarrassed by her behavior, but too weak to stop it. I walked over to their table, my professional smile firmly in place despite the fury burning in my chest. "Is there a problem here?" I asked pleasantly. Lilia whirled around, relief flooding her face when she saw me. "Marlene, thank God. This waitress completely messed up my order and then had the audacity to argue with me about it." I looked at Carmen, who was close to tears, then back at Lilia. "I'm sure it was just a simple misunderstanding. These things happen." "No, they don't happen when staff are properly trained," Lilia shot back. "I want her fired." The dining room had gone quiet around us. Other passengers were watching the scene unfold, some with disapproval at Lilia's behavior, others with the uncomfortable fascination people have for public humiliation. "Mrs. Cooper," I said, my voice still perfectly professional, "I understand you're upset. Why don't we step outside and discuss this privately? No, I want this resolved right here, right now. This girl doesn't deserve to work on this ship." Carmen looked at me with pleading eyes. I knew her story. She was 23, supporting her parents and 2 younger siblings back home. This job was everything to her. "Actually," I said, my voice taking on a slight edge, "Carmen is one of our finest staff members. She's been recognized for excellence in guest service multiple times." Lilia's eyes narrowed. "Are you contradicting me? I'm providing accurate information about our staff." I smiled, but there was steel in it now. Perhaps the confusion arose from a miscommunication about your order. "There was no miscommunication. She's incompetent, and you're clearly too inexperienced to recognize poor service when you see it." The insult hung in the air between us. Around the dining room, I could see other passengers shifting uncomfortably. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 3 days, the moment when Lilia's true nature would be on full display for everyone to see. "I assure you, Mrs. Cooper, I have extensive experience in guest services," I said quietly. "More than you might realize." Something in my tone must have penetrated her self-righteous fury because she paused, studying my face more carefully than she had since boarding. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" she asked slowly. David looked up for the first time since the argument began. His eyes met mine, and I saw recognition dawn in them like a sunrise. His face went white. "Mom?" he whispered. The word dropped into the silent dining room like a stone into still water. Lilia spun around to stare at David, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "Hello, Lilia." Lilia's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, confusion, anger, and finally, humiliation, as she realized that everyone in the dining room had heard David call me Mom. "You," she started, then stopped, her brain clearly struggling to process the situation. "You're supposed to be homeless, destitute, begging you to take me back?" I finished for her. I was, for about 4 days. Then I found something better. David was staring at me like I was a ghost. "How are you here? How are you on this ship?" "I work here," I said simply. "Well, actually, I own part of it." The statement hit them like a physical blow. Lilia actually staggered backward, her hand reaching for the back of her chair for support. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" I looked around the dining room, at the passengers who were now openly staring, at Carmen who was watching with wide eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your meal. Sometimes family dynamics can be complicated." I turned back to Lilia, who was still gaping at me like a fish out of water. "As for your complaint about the service, I'll be sure to note in your file that you attempted to have one of our best staff members fired for bringing you exactly what you ordered. Carmen, thank you for your patience with this situation." Carmen nodded, still looking confused but relieved that she wasn't in trouble. "Now," I continued, looking at David and Lilia, "I believe you were enjoying your anniversary cruise. Please, don't let me interrupt that. We'll have plenty of time to catch up later." I started to walk away, but Lilia's voice stopped me. "Wait!" Her voice was shrill with panic. "You can't just— We need to talk." I turned back, my expression politely inquiring. "About what?" About everything. About what happened. About the misunderstanding." There was no misunderstanding, Lilia. You made your feelings about me very clear. I gestured around the elegant dining room. As you can see, I've moved on. David finally found his voice. Mom, please, can we go somewhere private and talk? For a moment, looking at my son's pale, desperate face, I felt the old impulse to comfort him, to make everything okay. But that impulse was weaker now, tempered by the knowledge of what he was really asking for. We'll have time to talk tomorrow night, I said. At the Welcome Aboard show, I'll be on stage with the other senior staff members. The full implications of that statement hit them both simultaneously. Lilia's face went ash-gray as she realized that I wouldn't just be introduced as staff, I'd be introduced as part ownership. Oh God, David whispered. What have we done? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had thrown me out of his house, who had chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's love, who had seen me as nothing more than a source of money. You got exactly what you wanted, I said quietly, a life without me in it. Then I walked away, leaving them sitting in their luxury dining room, surrounded by the whispers of other passengers who had witnessed their public humiliation. As I made my way back to the staff areas, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out. The pretense was over. Tomorrow night, when James introduced me to the entire ship as his business partner and the woman he loved, David and Lilia would understand the full scope of what they had lost. But more importantly, I would finally be free of the last chains that bound me to a family that had never truly valued me. The old Marlene would have felt guilty about their embarrassment. The new Marlene, Marlene Morrison, felt only the sweet satisfaction of justice finally served. Tonight, I would have dinner with James in the captain's quarters, planning our future together. Tomorrow night, I would stand on that stage as an equal partner in a business empire, loved and respected by a man who saw my worth, and David and Lilia would sit in the audience, finally understanding that their actions had consequences they never could have imagined. The theater was packed for the Welcome Aboard show. 1,500 passengers filled the red velvet seats, all dressed in their cruise finery, excited for the evening's entertainment. From backstage, I could hear the buzz of conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, the anticipatory energy that always preceded these events. I stood in the wings wearing an elegant navy cocktail dress that James had helped me choose. Sophisticated, confident, beautiful. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the broken, discarded mother who had slept in her car 2 months ago. She looked like someone who belonged on this stage, someone who had earned her place in the world. You ready for this? James asked, adjusting his dress uniform. As captain, he would open the show and introduce the key staff members, including me. More ready than I've ever been for anything, I replied, and meant it. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see David and Lilia in the third row. They'd dressed up for the evening, probably their finest clothes, purchased for this cruise they couldn't afford. David kept checking his phone nervously, while Lilia sat rigid beside him, her face a mask of barely controlled anxiety. They'd tried to contact me 3 times since yesterday's dining room incident. Calls to my cabin, messages left with guest services, even an attempt to corner me near the pool deck. I'd avoided them all, maintaining my professional duties while staying just out of reach. Let them stew, let them wonder, let them experience the same uncertainty I'd lived with for years. The lights dimmed, and James stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was magnificent in his captain's uniform, commanding and confident as he welcomed the passengers aboard the Sea Star. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried easily across the theater. Welcome to what I promise will be an unforgettable cruise experience. Tonight, I want to introduce you to some of the exceptional people who make the magic happen on board our ship. He introduced the executive chef, the cruise director, the hotel manager, each receiving warm applause as they took their moment in the spotlight. I watched from the wings, my heart beating steadily, calmly. This was my moment, the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. And now, James continued, his voice taking on a special warmth, I want to introduce someone very special to our Morrison Maritime family. Please welcome our Vice President of Guest Services and my business partner, Marlene Morrison. The applause that greeted me as I walked onto the stage was warm and genuine. But I wasn't looking at the broader audience. I was looking directly at David and Lilia, watching their faces as the full reality of my transformation hit them. Lilia's mouth fell open. David went white as a sheet. Around them, other passengers applauded politely, unaware of the family drama playing out in the third row. Marlene joined our company 2 months ago, James continued, his hand finding mine as I reached his side, bringing decades of hospitality experience and a passion for ensuring every guest feels valued and appreciated. She's also the woman I'm going to marry. The last statement sent a ripple of surprised delight through the audience. Passengers loved romance, and the idea of the captain finding love with his business partner was exactly the kind of story they'd remember long after the cruise ended. But in the third row, David looked like he might be sick. James leaned down and kissed me gently, a sweet, public declaration of his love and commitment. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause and cheers. "We're very excited about our future together," I said into the microphone, my voice clear and strong, both personally and professionally. "Morrison Maritime has become my home, and I'm committed to making sure every passenger experiences the same sense of belonging and appreciation that I found here." The irony of those words, spoken while looking directly at the son who had made me homeless, was not lost on me. After the show, as passengers mingled in the theater lobby, David and Lilia made their way toward the stage. I watched them approach, noting how they moved, David hesitant and unsure, Lilia with the determined stride of someone who still believed she could manipulate her way out of trouble. "Mom," David said when they reached me, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "We need to talk." "I'm sure you do," I replied pleasantly, "but I'm rather busy tonight. Business partner responsibilities, you understand." Lilia stepped forward, and I could see her struggling to find the right approach. The woman who had slapped me, thrown me out, demanded my money, was now faced with the reality that I held all the power. "Marlene," she said, trying for a conciliatory tone, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. When we said those things, we were under so much stress." "What things?" I asked innocently. "When you demanded $50,000, when you slapped me, when you threw me out of the house, or when you tried to have my staff member fired yesterday for doing her job correctly." Each item on my list hit them like a physical blow. Other passengers were starting to notice the tense conversation, and Lilia was clearly aware of the attention. "Please," David said, his voice cracking, "can we just go somewhere private and work this out? You're still my mother." The words hung in the air between us. "You're still my mother," as if that meant something. As if the bond he'd severed so callously could be restored with a simple reminder of biology. "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Because when you threw me out of your house, you made it very clear that I was no longer part of your family." "We were wrong," he said, tears starting to form in his eyes. "We made a mistake. But you can't just cut us off completely. We're family." I looked at this man who had been my whole world for so many years, this child I'd sacrificed everything for, and felt a strange sort of peace. The desperate need for his love and approval had finally died, replaced by something much more valuable: self-respect. "David," I said gently, "for 37 years, I gave you everything I had: my time, my money, my energy, my dreams. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities I never had. And when you met Lilia, I welcomed her into our family. I helped you buy your house, supported you through career changes, babysat when you needed time alone together." He nodded, tears now flowing freely. "I know, Mom. I know you did so much for us. And when I finally needed something from you, not money, not material support, just basic respect and kindness, you chose her demands over my dignity." I gestured toward Lilia, who was standing frozen beside him. "You watched her hit me and did nothing. You threw me out of your home and threatened to take everything I had left." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." "You were thinking exactly what you always think," I said, my voice still gentle but firm. "You were thinking about what was easiest for you, what would cause you the least conflict with your wife. You weren't thinking about me at all." Lilia finally found her voice. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but we're family. Families forgive each other. I turned to look at her. This woman who had systematically isolated me from my son, who had seen me as nothing more than a convenient ATM. Lilia, I said, you've never considered me family. You've tolerated me when I was useful and discarded me when I wasn't. That's not what family does. But the money, she started. What about it? You have so much, and we're struggling. The house, the debts, we could lose everything. I nodded thoughtfully. You're right, you could lose everything. In fact, you probably will. Bad financial decisions tend to have consequences. The bluntness of my response clearly shocked her. She'd expected me to soften, to offer help, to fall back into my old pattern of rescuing them from their own choices. You'd really let us lose our house? David asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. I'm not letting you do anything, I replied. Your financial situation is the result of your own decisions. Lilia's failed investment, your refusal to live within your means, your assumption that I would always be there to bail you out, none of that is my responsibility anymore. James appeared at my side, having finished his post-show duties. He took in the scene immediately, the tears, the tension, the desperate expressions on David and Lilia's faces. Everything all right here? He asked, his arm sliding protectively around my waist. Just catching up with my son and daughter-in-law, I said. They were just leaving. We weren't, Lilia started, but I cut her off. Yes, you were. This conversation is over. David looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading. Mom, please, I'll do anything. I'll leave Lilia if that's what you want. I'll get on my knees and beg. Just please don't abandon me. The offer to leave Lilia was clearly desperate and hollow. He'd never follow through, and we all knew it. But even if he would, it was too late. The damage was done, the relationship irreparably broken. David, I said, feeling a strange sort of pity for him, I'm not abandoning you. You abandoned me 2 months ago when you threw me out of your house. I'm simply accepting the reality you created. But you're rich now. You have everything you need. Yes, I do. I have a business I'm passionate about, a man who loves and respects me, and a future full of possibilities. I have everything I need, and more importantly, I have people in my life who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I looked around the theater lobby, at the passengers enjoying their evening, at the staff members who had become my colleagues and friends, at James, whose love had helped me remember my own worth. This is my family now, I said simply. The words hit David like a physical blow. He staggered backward, the full finality of my rejection finally sinking in. You can't mean that, he whispered. I can, and I do. I took James's hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his support. I'm done being your safety net, David. I'm done sacrificing my happiness for yours. I'm done pretending that blood relation means more than basic human decency. Lilia made one last desperate attempt. What about grandchildren? Don't you want to be a grandmother someday? The question was meant to hit me where it hurt most, to remind me of all the future experiences I'd be missing. But instead of pain, I felt only relief. Any children you might have would be raised by you, I said. Given your values and priorities, I think they're better off without my influence. With that, I turned away from them and walked toward the exit, James beside me. Behind us, I could hear Lilia's voice rising in panic, David's pleas becoming more desperate. But I didn't look back. We walked out onto the deck, where the Caribbean night air was warm and sweet. The ship cut through dark water toward our next destination, leaving a wake of phosphorescent foam behind us. How do you feel? James asked, pulling me into his arms. I considered the question seriously. Free, I said finally. For the first time in my adult life, completely free. Any regrets? I thought about David and Lilia, probably back in their cabin now, finally understanding that their actions had permanent consequences. I thought about the grandchildren I might never meet, the family gatherings I'd never attend, the traditional connections I was severing forever. None, I said, and meant it. James kissed me then, soft and sweet under the Caribbean stars. When we broke apart, he was smiling. So what do you want to do with all this freedom? I looked out at the endless ocean stretching to the horizon, full of islands we'd explore together, adventures we'd share, a business we'd build side by side. Everything, I said. I want to do everything. The next morning, David and Lilia disembarked at our first port of call. They didn't complete the cruise, didn't enjoy the vacation they'd bankrupted themselves to afford. Instead, they flew home to face their mounting debts and dying marriage without the safety net they'd taken for granted for so long. I watched their tender boat carry them back to shore from the captain's deck, feeling nothing but a peaceful sense of closure. The old Marlene would have felt guilty, would have run after them with apologies and checkbook in hand. But I wasn't the old Marlene anymore. I was Marlene Morrison, business owner, beloved partner, woman of worth and dignity. I was exactly who I was meant to be. The Sea Star sailed on without them, carrying me toward a future I'd chosen for myself, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. At 62, my real life was finally beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.